Welcome back to the Racial Draft Podcast, the podcast where we change the complexion of the comic book universe one draft pick at a time. We were still streaming live on Twitter. If you are so inclined, go ahead and participate in our comments stream. If you're listening to us in podcast form, thank you. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you. If you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and hit that like button or smash that like button, whatever they do. But go ahead and subscribe there. Subscribe in all of the places, honestly. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, YouTube, wherever you can type in racial draft and we pop up. Go ahead and subscribe, go ahead and like, go ahead and share, expand the community, make your voice known, and we will try to amplify it. We're gonna, just do our thing this week. It doesn't seem like we've been joined by a guest. But in a way, aren't we all guests on this planet of Earth? Anyway, this is the first round of the season 7 Dynasty draft. And I'll go ahead and remind you about how the Dynasty draft works as distinguished from a single season draft. In the single season draft, at the end of the season, all the picks that were made previously get thrown back into the pool. So you're basically just drafting for the season, which lasts about 25 weeks. However, with respect to the Dynasty draft, when you draft a character for your particular delegation, that character remains in the delegation until they are either traded or drafted in a season draft, which only that delegation who has Dynasty drafted the character can draft. So, these are more for characters that you would like to acquire and hold on to for a longer period of time than just one season. Obviously, the scoring works differently. Well, I would say obviously, but the scoring does work differently for the Dynasty drafted characters. And, we don't have to get into the specifics of that. But, you have certain incentives to draft characters for one season, and then you have different incentives in terms of drafting a character for the long term. Perhaps that's a character who might become more prominent somewhere down the line than they are at a given moment. Perhaps it's a character that is more of a supporting character than a lead character, but a character that's important to the delegation nonetheless. That would be the kind of thinking behind some of these dynasty picks, strategically, if you will. Hopefully, we'll have some guests on over the course of the remainder of the season, and they'll talk through their thought process behind some of these dynasty picks. But we'll just dive right in, and we'll talk about the first pick of the 7th season Dynasty Draft, and that is a character named Lady Frankenstein, aka the Bride. You might know her from literature, but she is also a DC character, and she's a character who will appear in Creature Commandos somewhere down the line. I think next year, if I recall correctly, Creature Commandos will be debuting. So this is probably one of the situations where the South Asian delegation, the one who drafted Lady Frankenstein, is looking longer term. Lady Frankenstein doesn't really appear too much in the current run of DC Comics, but perhaps in the future. And of course, like I said, the upcoming Creature Commando show. So, I would say that part of what's animating this decision, and we can get into it a little bit more specifically, is the fact that for the voice cast, Indira Varma was cast, to portray her in the animated series, and I believe James Gunn made it clear that actors, for the most part, actors who are being voice cast are also being live action cast if that character were to ever appear in live action. So this is one of those, get in there. This is already within the thought process of the people be over in DC and WB. So from that perspective, I think it's an interesting pick. I also think it's an interesting pick because if you think about the sort of history of how South Asians were part of an underclass in British imperial society, it would sort of moving forward, it would follow, I would think, that that someone such as Frankenstein might use a South Asian woman, out of disrespect. So, out of disrespect for our autonomy, might use her and kind of not treat her with the same level of respect that he might treat a white British person. So I like to send those perspectives myself. Um, the people, they're a little mixed on it right now. This is one of the polls where by the time you listen to this, may still be open, may still not be open, but go ahead and cast your vote at Racial Draft Pod on Twitter. If you're watching us here, you can cast your vote right now. If not, go ahead and try to cast it both on Twitter and also at racialdraft.com, which is the main website that we do our thing at. So as of right now, 66.7% approval rating for South Asian Lady Frankenstein. There was, like I said, there was a fan cast. Well, the fan cast was just sort of going along with the real cast, and that would be Indira Varma. A little bit lower. I was actually surprised. I'm a big Indira Varma fan. So 57.1% approval rating for Indira Varma, with 28.6 somewhat disapproving and 14.3 strongly disapproving, which, to my eyes, is a little racist. Going back to, like I said, 66.7 strongly approve and 33.3 somewhat disapprove of the pick. So it's a little bit of an inauspicious beginning, but we will go from one inauspicious beginning to another, and that would be the first pick for the Polynesian delegation. You might remember the Polynesian delegation drafted Professor X in the main season draft. Well, they went ahead and drafted Professor X's half-brother, Kane Marco, aka the Juggernaut, as their pick in this season draft. The idea, presumably, is one brother is sort of a mental superhero, and the other is more of a physical threat. And I sort of like the idea of a Samoan Juggernaut, to the extent that the Juggernaut doesn't have to be a white person. They're definitely big hulking Samoans. And the big hulking Samoan was chosen in this case was Tonoi Reed, who you might know as the stunt double for The Rock in a number of movies. And The Rock himself is a pretty big guy. However, disappointingly, the approvals were not favorable at all. We're looking at a 28.6% approval rating, which is one of the lower ones that we've seen, and 57.1 somewhat disapprove, and 14.3 strongly disapprove of this pick. With respect to the fan cast, it's even lower, 25% approving of the pick and 75% disapproving, somewhat disapproving of the fan cast. So did not go over well, unfortunately, for the Polynesian delegation. But moving on from the Polynesian delegation, we can speak to the Swana-Mena delegation. And their pick, definitely one of the let's draft a supporting character pick. For the sake of aesthetics. One of the things that I didn't realize, and I'll go ahead and mention who the character was before I get into my discourse, I suppose. Hippolyta, who are the Amazons. One of the things that I did not realize about the Amazons in general is that they are, the mythology around the Amazons may have been based around real warrior women, Persian warrior women. So to the extent that this character might be reimagined as Persian, as Southwest Asian, so to speak, that this has some bearing, has some connection to a historical, I wouldn't say historical accuracy, but at least a historical resonance. And perhaps this is why, in a sort of surprising turn of events, 100% approval rating as of yet, as of now, for Persian Hippolyta. In addition to the choice for the draft pick, there was also a choice for the fan cast. The amazing actress, who you may not remember her name, but you definitely know her face and iconic voice, and that's Sheree oops, I butchered her name. Agdash. Oh, Agdash. I should have looked this up. I apologize. But Sheree Agadashlu. And again, I apologize for butchering her name, but you have definitely heard her voice and you've definitely seen her face. And she's an amazing actress who, in every performance, has a level of regalness that is perfectly fitting for a queen. Unfortunately, the people were as disappointing as my pronunciation of her name, with 40% approval rating and 60% somewhat disapproving of the choice. Moving on to a name that I can pronounce much more easily, and forgive my Western sensibilities, but one side of the war, the peaceful warrior, to the warrior who was decidedly less peaceful, and that would be Frank Castle, Punisher. He's also had a stint as Cosmic Ghost Rider, but we know him most as the Punisher, and that was the selection from the white delegation. So, I don't really have too many notes here. I mean, I think that to the extent that the Punisher is an aggrieved person whose reaction to suffering tragedy is to go to war against the entirety of the criminal world, not just the people who made his life terrible, but anyone who might potentially commit a crime. And it's a bit of an overkill, but it hasn't changed the fact that this is a character that is tremendously popular, and to the extent that iconic is often not thought of literally. This is an iconic character for whom the Punisher symbol is recognizable, if not the world over, definitely in the States. So Frank Castle, the Punisher, white delegation, seems to, I mean, it's one of the reasons that he's so popular, for being honest. And, I can't say that I have any cause to disapprove of it. However, the people might feel differently. Well, they do feel differently, because we're looking at a 57.2% approval rating for still white Frank Castle. Frank Castle remaining white, with 42.9 strongly approving, 14.3 somewhat approving, 14.3 somewhat disapproving, and a whopping 28.6% strongly disapproving of white Frank Castle. As far as the fan cast, they're sticking with the classic. They're sticking with John Bernthal, who has, portrayed this character for a number of years and has always earned rave reviews. So I'm not as surprised that the approval rating is a little higher, but I'm still surprised that it's as low as it is, at 66.7% approval, 50% strongly approve, which is, again, fairly low. 16.7 somewhat approve, 16.7 somewhat disapprove, and 16.7 strongly disapproving. That does not seem to jive with most of the discussion around the character. So again, if you're a listener, go ahead to Racial Draft Pod on Twitter and cast your vote. Get those approval numbers up if you so choose. Moving on from the Punisher to another vigilante, but one decidedly less well known. And that would be the second Green Arrow, Connor Hawke, the son of Oliver Queen. And I gotta be honest here. One of the weird quirks about Connor Hawke is that canonically, he's supposed to be the son of a white guy and an Asian woman, but to see him, he almost always looks black. I never quite figured out how that worked. I still haven't quite figured out how it worked. The multiracial delegation is in there, and you might have forgotten that in this incarnation of the racial draft, that Oliver Queen himself was drafted by the East Asian delegation, and therefore, in this instance, I think that he could be Blasian, and the multiracial aspect sort of works in terms of his phenotype, in terms of how he looks. Obviously in subsequent seasons, if Oliver Queen doesn't get drafted, they may have to tinker a little bit. But one of the benefits of being a multiracial delegation is that it's a little bit of a skeleton key. You can play around with the ethnic mixes in order to make your character work. So, in every incarnation of the character, he's been some kind of multiracial. So, I mean, it's in a sense, it's a defensive pick, but in another sense, it's a forward-thinking pick, because it's a character who is multiracial, but the precise machinations of what made him multiracial have been traditionally a little bit murky. From an approval perspective, though, shockingly, only 50% approval rating for a multiracial Common Hawk, which, again, don't know what the cause for objection there would be. But it's 50% strongly approve, 33.3% somewhat disapprove, and 16.7% racist. Moving on from Connor to a defensive pick from our friends at the Southeast Asian delegation. This is a character that I can only imagine is going to get more popular over time. And that is a character, Cindy Moon, aka Silk. Sorry, I got a little tongue-tied there. This is a character who was, been in the comics for quite some time. She was teased at the end of the most recent, sorry for spoilers, but she's in the most recent Spider-Man video game. We know that there is a live action series in development at Amazon through Sony, Spider Society, Silk. And, there was a Cindy Moon in the MCU, but not this Cindy Moon that became Silk, as far as we know on that. So that is a character, like I said, that's probably due to become more popular over time. And it's a character that has been drafted multiple times by the Southeast Asian delegation. And I can't really say that I have any reason to object to this. In fact, I am baffled and shocked at the fact that it's only 77.8% approval rating right now for Silk remaining East Asian. 77, it's all strongly approved, 77.8, and it's 11.1 somewhat approved, and somewhat disapproved, and 11.1 strongly disapproving, which again, it can only be explained through racism. And I'm going to do that. I'm calling you out. Racism. As far as the fan cast, is an actress that I'm not very familiar with, but she is Korean American, Ji Young Yu. I'm not familiar with her work, but she's a young Korean American actress. I would imagine that she's good at her job, and she can do a very good job at playing Silk. So the approval rating there is a little higher, 85.7 to be exact, 57.1, 28.6. and 14.3 somewhat disapproving, which again, perhaps someone has seen her work and doesn't think she'd be a good fit, but no strong disapprove. So the racism has been at least somewhat tempered with respect to the fan cast. Moving on, this is a pick that definitely is topical because we got the recent news that Julia Garner was cast in the MCU to play a version of the Silver Surfer. That version being Shallow Ball, Zenwa, aka Norrin Rad's girlfriend, but no more. Now, Norrin Rad is going to be her boyfriend because she is the Silver Surfer in the new Fantastic Four movie. And she has been Silver Surfer very briefly in the comics, but of course, canonically, Norrin Rad is the Silver Surfer. So the Jewish delegation went ahead. They already have, from a previous season, they already have Norrin Rad as part of their Dynasty roster. So they went ahead and drafted Sheila Ball as part of their Dynasty roster. And now, a Jewish couple. And for those of you who don't know, Julia Garner, who was cast to portray her, is also Jewish. So they went ahead and stuck with that as the fan cast. So as of now, the approval rating for the pick is 85.7%, 71.4 strongly approved, 14.3 somewhat approved, and 14.3% somewhat disapproved. As far as the fan cast, we're looking at 90% approval rating, which is 40% strongly approved, 50% somewhat approved, and 10% strongly disapprove, which maybe sometimes, maybe, I don't know. Tricky here. But anyhow, Sheila Ball, Shallow Ball, sorry. The Shallow Ball, she's going to have a moment, I'm sure, as we get closer to her debut in live action. I would imagine that Marvel will find a way to bring her back to the forefront in comics. So this can definitely be a strong, longer-term play for the Jewish delegation. Solid pick, solidly timed, I would say. Another solid pick comes from our friends at the Black Delegation. Shout out to Randy, who guested with us last week. Hasn't joined us this week, but it's all right, because there's not a lot to explain about this pick. This is Wallace West, aka the Black Wally West, aka some people's not so favorite character. And I mean, I suppose part of the reason for it is that White Wally West is such a beloved character, and when Wallace West was introduced, he was introduced at a time when White Wally West was not around, and people thought that he was a replacement for White Wally West, and that didn't do the toll for very well. Subsequently, White Wally West was brought back into continuity. Then we had the problem of two Wally Wests, and some might consider this Wally West to be redundant. I actually think that, given that he's a younger, given that they kept him as Kid Flash, as the younger of the two, and they were able to firmly establish the growth that the elder Wally, White Wally, as it were, had as he grew into the role from Kid Flash to Main Flash and had a family and children, and has firmly settled into this role of family man Flash, even in a lot of senses, to even a larger degree as Barry Allen has. And I think that to the extent that there are sidekicks who have grown from their role to sidekick to main hero, the Wally West story, the elder Wally West story, is one of the bigger success stories in DC history as far as maintaining that arc and having that arc pay off. So in having a younger Wally West who can embody the Kid Flash name, but of course, because he's black, he's necessarily going to bring different aspects of his personality to the table, aspects to his story, because the experience of being a young black man, especially today, is clearly going to be different from being a Midwestern white guy who looks up to a superhero. And I think that, there have been stops and starts in terms of how well Wallace has fit into the mythos. Hasn't always been perfect. I mean, I think that some cool things are being done right now in the Speed Force book, especially involving his relationship with the the Chinese American. Well, I guess she's just Chinese, but she's in America. Avery Ho. Their friendship, having two young flashes that are both people of color, and seeing how they relate to the rest of the speedster verse, as it were, has been interesting. And I think that there's a lot more room for Wallace West's future. I wouldn't be surprised if, well, we could talk about how Wallace West was portrayed on the Flash television show. I think in a lot of ways he was kind of an amalgam of the the younger version that we get in the comics and the older version that I spoke about, the white Wally West. But I think that there's a lot more room to flesh out this character. But I definitely think he's a strong asset for the Black delegation, and I think he's a worthwhile character for the Black delegation to hold on to. The people, a little mixed, not as mixed as some of the earlier picks, but 77.8% approval rating for him remaining Black, and then 22.2 somewhat disapproving of that. So it's gonna be hard to beat those racism allegations, if we're being honest. Speaking of defensive picks, from one speedy-ish character to another speedy-ish character, and that is the Latinx delegation and their drafting of Robbie Reyes, who you might know as Ghost Rider. He's not the first, but in a lot of ways, he's bringing something different to the Ghost Rider table because, he's a Chicano. He is immersed in car culture, drives a Charger, the Hell Charger, and he was a street racer, in East LA, who was imbued with the power of Ghost Rider, imbued with the power of a demon, which then became a Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance power. I'm not exactly sure about the specifics of how that worked in his mythos, but he's firmly ensconced in the Ghost Rider milieu now. And I think that to the extent, if we do see a Ghost Rider in live action, I think that one of, if not the primary Ghost Rider, will definitely be Robbie Reyes. So great pick as far as I'm concerned. Very popular character. I mean, he also appeared on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., a little bit of an older version of the character for my taste, because I, typically imagine him as sort of he got his powers when he was in high school. So I think he's still in that coming of age version of his arc. He's the youngest. When he was in the Avengers, he was the youngest Avenger. I think that there's still a little bit more growth in his character, in his the character of Robbie Reyes, more so than the character of Ghost Rider. Hopefully, when he is brought back or brought into the MCU proper, and he's brought in such a way that they allow him to kind of occupy that space of kind of coming into his own as a man. Jumping ahead though to the approval rating, 87.5% approval, which is great. I still think it should be higher. I think it should be in the 90 range. So listeners, you do have enough time to get in there and vote on either Twitter or racialdraft.com and get those votes in there. So do so. And that brings us to the final pick of the round. I wouldn't say this pick is controversial, but it's definitely a character that's a little more obscure. Perhaps not obscure if you're a reader of the Planetary series, which was a Wildstorm title. But this is still a different version of a character that made his debut in Planetary, and that's, I keep wanting to say the Drummer, but it's just Drummer. Drummer is known for having the ability to use drum patterns to tap into the history of an object, to basically on the same wavelength of history through music. And this version of Drummer that is currently the main drummer of the DC universe, uh, very much does resemble a Native American woman. I don't know if that was the intent. And the Native American delegation went ahead and drafted her based on, based on the high likelihood that to the extent that if a drummer were, who better, I would say, who better than a Native American drummer to be able to uh, commune with history itself. So I love this pick. I mean, obviously, this is a character we may not see very often, but it's a character that in terms of what the character could represent, how important the character could be as that blank slate continues to be filled in. That's a kind of character that could resonate in different Native American communities if that aspect was brought into the canon and further fleshed out. Approval wise, maybe not where you want it to be. 71.4%. It's not bad. But again, it's another situation where if you think that there's potential in Native American drummer, go ahead and cast your vote. RacialDraft.com, Racial Draft Pod on Twitter. Get that up. Get your approval. Make your opinion known. My opinion, I'm already making known. I'm saying that I definitely think that this is could be a really great pick, really inspired pick. But if you feel otherwise, go ahead, speak your piece. Speaking your piece, I should have mentioned earlier at the top of the podcast that we can also be reached at email at racialdraftpodcast@gmail.com. So if you have longer form thoughts that can't fit in a tweet or a message, you can bring those thoughts to the podcast there. If you want to go talk about some of the earlier picks that were made in the season, you want to sort of revisit those picks through a different lens, go ahead and hit us with the email at racialdraftpodcast@gmail.com. But that's it. We're gonna keep it a little abbreviated this week. No use stretching it out. We got our 10 picks in. We'll be back next week to talk about round 2 of the Racial Draft Dynasty Draft. I'm sure the picks will be even better, but that's a lot of that is up for you to decide. So go ahead and make your voice known. Racial Draft Pod, RacialDraft.com, all of the places, the other social media, Instagram, Threads, YouTube. Like and subscribe. Check us out whenever I go live. Go ahead and throw your thumbs up and your checks and all and the like. As long as we're free and on Elon's Twitter, as long as that lasts, we'll be coming at you live when we can. So I'm gonna leave it there. Tune in next week. Same race time, same race channel. But until then, all things are possible.